first start with a tiny introduction as to why we're doing this and why you are part of this and who you are in our world. So we decided to have informal conversations about topics that are relevant, largely based on our previous webinar, where the conversations in our preparation were more beneficial than the actual webinar. And I think it was the informal nature, it was the repartee, backwards and forwards, knowing that no one was watching. It just kind of made it super engaging. And Tendai and I, when we were doing the prep, we were like, oh, these are incredible conversations. We should actually just have these as the conversations. And then as we thought about August having an emphasis on women, this topic emerged, and I was thinking, I did have a conversation, a sidebar with somebody about women's leadership development, and he was very much, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it should be a thing anymore. So I'm like, well, let's explore that. Let's get people with good brains, who are thoughtful, who are working in the workplace that Inspired Leadership operates in, which is organizations, corporates, and pull together people who are thinkers and who are articulate in their viewpoints, which is where, ta-da, you came in, going, these are people who are thoughtful, who have experience as participants in programs, in breaking through glass ceilings, knocking on glass ceilings, standing on glass ceilings, and watching and observing women in the workplace. So that's how this started. Although it's relevant, but not hugely relevant, because you're a woman in the workplace and you've got lots of experience behind you. Maybe Mpho, Jen, Osha, Tendai, you can just do a quick whip around for our people who will be watching this as to your high-level intro and the role that you play at the moment. Mpho, maybe you can start, then Jen, Osha, Tendai.
Thank you, Angela. So my name is Mpho Chitapi, and I'm a legal executive within the financial services industry. I practiced at a law firm before joining as in-house counsel. And yeah, that's the role that I'm currently playing at the moment.
Thanks so much, Mpho. I'm Genevieve Kulin. I am HR Director for SAP Africa, so South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Angola. And I've been doing this for about 30 years. And I have spent quite a lot of time in helping to shape generational perspectives around women in the workplace, having been doing this from the time I was probably one of the only women in boardrooms. So it's been a journey, and excited to share some thoughts.
Yay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So my name is Tendai Chitapi. Blessed and privileged to be the spouse of Mpho over there. I'm thankful to be having this conversation with you all. My background has primarily been sort of around corporate finance and accounting for almost 20 years, after which I took a plunge into the world of entrepreneurship, particularly focusing on the agri-tech space. And that journey has brought me to a place of, I think, understanding the nature and importance of leadership as strategy, and how we can, I think, empower and transform organizations to be future fit for a world, I think, in which many of the right kinds of changes are happening, but which really need our enablement. So I'm hoping to lend, I guess, a male view and perspective around this conversation. I think I benefit from gender privilege, and so I think that would be I think the lens through which I'd be able to hopefully bring some value to this discussion.
Brilliant, 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 fabulous. So the question is leadership development as an initiative something that's still relevant? So I'm open to hear. What do you think? What do you think? Who wants to weigh in?
I mean, direct us. I think we're all ready.
Go. Okay, Jen. Open the floor. Is it worth it? Should companies be investing in it? Why? What makes?
So I mean, maybe not to start overtly provocatively, but to maybe make an opening statement around relevance. I think that the relevance is still there. I think that it is important to focus on it, but I would say that it is fundamentally different from what we've been doing for the last 5, 10, 15 years, you know. So I would say absolutely, but it has a more strategic focus. It is not the leadership development of the past. There are some important strategic changes that we have to contemplate. There are some important structural changes we have to make, and there are some important generational issues that we need to be thinking about when we think about leadership for women. So I would argue still incredibly important, but very, very different from our past.
So when you say past, what do you think of as the traditional approach?
So, I mean, if we just look at maybe, I'll guess at Osha and myself, at least, who've been doing this for a bit of time, you know, we've been around the block. I think that historically, for many of us, we were maybe the only females in boardrooms, one of the few females. I'm a woman of color sitting in a boardroom. So I had a very particular history, you know, and I can definitely say from my own experience that there was a lot of pretzeling that we did, you know, to fit in, to be recognized, to be seen as capable and competent in boardrooms. And for much of the time, we were probably needing to just introduce the idea of women into the organization, never needing to deal with some of the structural issues that persist today, but in small doses and very gently, you know, getting people accustomed to having us just having an opinion in a boardroom, being there in a boardroom. So historically, I think it's been very much more about just access, just letting people around the table. You know, before we even start to have the conversations about, are people capable, are they competent, etc., etc. I think where we are today is about recognizing women are often in very strategic roles, in very important roles, but we haven't dealt with some of the structural problems that exist in organizations. We bring women in mass, in junior roles, to build the pipeline. But as you look further up the organization, you start to see that really, really starts to diminish, right? And particularly in areas of tech, for example, you know, we even have a term called tech bros. We don't have a term called tech girls, you know, it's not a thing. The tech bros are, as we all see, prevalent in global markets, you know, and you know, we can discuss whether that's what we want for the future, but they have a particular culture about them, a particular agenda, a particular way of being. We don't see that with women in tech. In fact, what we're seeing is that those roles are becoming more and more diminished, and that it is quite hard for people to make it into those, for women to make it into those top levels. And maybe because it's tech, we don't think of the leadership actually in tech being quite conservative. Okay, so there are some structural changes that I think we need to be talking about for the future, which have nothing to do with women fixing themselves. It has to do with systems being fixed to accommodate some of the bigger issues that we need to deal with as a society.
The legal profession is, my view, and this is very uneducated in this space, has felt like it has had less barriers and it is more gender equal on the outside. But I'm not on the inside. What has been your feel from being on the inside of a profession like legal?
Yeah, so my experience has been quite different, Angela. And you know, I feel like I haven't been a beneficiary, particularly in my time in a law firm environment. I haven't been a beneficiary of leadership development, particularly for women. And it was, I think, a very jarring experience for me because I had the intersectionality of being quite young in my career, being young, being Black, and then being female. Those are three things that I sort of had to navigate. And I feel as though I was thrown into the deep end without that focused support that I needed. In terms of representation as well, it was very hard to find other people who looked like me around me who were doing what I was doing. And I feel like having that kind of support at that level is what I needed to sort of thrive in that role. And so naturally, when I got there, when I made partner, and now I was new to this leadership role. I'm in boardrooms I've never been in. I'm sitting around tables, you know, with people who don't look like me. I felt a little bit like I was drowning. And I feel that at that point, that's when I needed that lifeline to even be able to articulate the kind of issues that I was going through at that time. And I didn't have that platform. I didn't have those mentors. I didn't have that around me. And it was only when I actually jumped into the financial services industry that I actually came into contact with what leadership development actually is. And again, still at a gender neutral point of view, it was not even specialized. But I've had to sort of seek out women's experiences in an informal setting, you know, like this one, at a fireside chat, at a seminar or a webinar for women. It's never been packaged for me as a development program. And I really think, looking back and reflecting on where I am now, I would have really benefited from being part, you know, of a program that addresses the nuances that women in particular face in leadership.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. It's that sort of aloneness and loneliness of being put into leadership without the support. What strikes me, and Tendai, this is going to be directed at you, is when you hear this, does it feel different, like distinctly different from what you would experience going as a member of a C-suite or going into a leadership role? Is that a foreign concept?
I think the leadership systems have been built with men in mind, right? So when Genevieve talks about the systemic reality that sort of has to be undone, I think the recognition that the system has got inbuilt inequity is an important starting place. So, I mean, and this is the same for all conversations of any kind of privilege, of any kind of systemic, marginalization, oppression. We can talk about racism. We can talk about, we can talk about any of the systems that have created an sort of asymmetry of access, right? And I certainly feel that those biases that are inbuilt are largely ignored or swept, I guess, aside, right? There's a tendency, I think, to hire and promote, in your own image, right? She talks about tech bros and just even the colloquial language that we have around the kinds of places where these decisions are made. We have fundamentally, as society, chosen patriarchy as our sort of psychosocial construct of choice, right? We are living in that reality. So how and why that has arisen is another conversation, but the effect of it would be, from what I can surmise, that a woman would have to pretzel herself to be one of the boys rather than the boys sort of creating a safe environment, understanding that systemic reality and that some of these biases exist, right? So there's sort of a two-sided approach to it. There's an unlearning that has to happen. First, there's a recognition. I think that's the starting point. We have to acknowledge the gendered nature of C-suites, of leadership, of corporate ladders, for what they are. Because then we're only with that recognition can we then start to dismantle and rebuild, I think, in a manner that is more reflective and more representative. I think that certainly in my experience, just simple things like brotherhood, mentorship, things that are less of the hard and fast and more support structures. As I have walked my own journey, I have sometimes, I mean, now again, with I think an increased level of awareness, I've wondered what this looks like for a woman, right? So, I mean, I don't even really think I've got much to offer apart from, I think, an acknowledgement that it feels like it would be a lonely journey for a woman to enter into a male-dominated C-suite, and what do we do about that, right? So the work that we do around vulnerability and creating safe spaces, I think it lends itself very well to this kind of conversation, because then we can approach the inclusion of women as a strategic imperative in leadership design and strategic design, rather than tick box DNI exercise. And so, yeah, those I think would be some of my reflections on that.
I'm desperate to slightly challenge you back. Just to, out of, maybe Jen, you're probably sitting on the same like provocative comment. I can feel you, I'm channeling my inner Jen. Is to go, given the work that you do on safe spaces, Tendai, and men's mental health, are men not also suffering from imposter syndrome and lack of being able to ask for help and feeling alone and lonely in their corporate position, but unable or hamstrung to raise their hand and go, I need help. I don't have the skills or whatever it is that got me here.
So Paul will recognize this phrase from conversations we have, which is that many things can be true at once, right? Okay. It is the case that the very society that I am describing has created and comes with a lot of pressure on men to perform at a certain level, to be flawless, to not make mistakes, to be protectors, to be providers, to be superheroes, essentially, right? To the point that, yes, I think, I mean, and I've certainly experienced this in my own life, this pressure of perfection and pressure to always show up. And so I think, yes, men do have a set of challenges and pressures that they face, but I worry about, a red herring outcome in a conversation around how women have been sidelined, because I think the conversation around men's mental health and opening up mentally and emotionally to get that kind of support, I think is still one that is, I guess, fairly starting to become mainstream. I think it's still, people are still starting to get comfortable having those conversations. Men are only now starting to say, okay, it's okay to say, I don't know, it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay. But I think that acknowledgement, I guess the link is that when men face that and come to that point of awareness and those realizations, they start to then lead the charge for a better sort of world for all, right? Safe men or men who are vulnerable, who are self-aware, make the world a safer place, make boardrooms a safer place, make strategic decisions, and bring strategic thought processes that have got a wider and broader lens. So in that way, I would say there is some causality, that the very men who are still more or less in charge in the bulk of our organizations, communities, governments, businesses, families, churches, that awareness around what can I do as a man to embrace vulnerability and humanity, and how does that spill over into how I show up for women, to make, I think, society and women part of strategic conversations and make it a safer space and a safer place in that way. So I think that would be the way that I would draw that particular cause and effect.
I feel like there's almost the women's leadership movement has been with structural disadvantage, and has meant that women have been, to some extent, encouraged to and supported in their leadership growth in some industries, in some cases. And Osha, I'm going to ask you for your experience on this, because you've been in this world longer from a development perspective. But men are actually only beginning it. They're at the beginning of this development journey of self-awareness and growth. And I don't like having the men and the women so separate, but it does seem like they are almost facing different requirements in their development journeys. Osha, you've been working corporate and your own experience and seeing how this has worked over the corporate life and your years in growing and grooming women. What's your take on the topic?
Yeah, so Angela, I've been working a lot within the last few years with women across Africa, actually, and in South Africa. And there's definitely that imposter syndrome. So much as many organizations are putting focus on women in the leadership roles now and getting them into the boardroom, women are sort of feeling like they have to prove themselves. So many of these women have honestly become superwomen. They're doing PhDs, they are running homes, they are running businesses, they are keeping the balance. So I have been like really shocked, well, maybe shock's not a good word. I've been really amazed to see how women have really stepped up and been bringing themselves forward. Back in the days when I was in my early career in quite a man's world, I found that women, when they were coming to the boardroom, were trying to behave like a man, rather than bringing what they can as women into the workplace. Sorry?
I'm saying that's the pretzeling that Jen was speaking about.
Yeah, trying to sort of be very male in their approach, and trying to sort of, no authenticity really. Whereas now I feel as if women are realizing that they're bringing perhaps empathy, perhaps other aspects that they can bring to the table. And women like Sheryl Sandberg, with her lean in, I think women are starting to realize that we bring something different. And we shouldn't be trying to be like a man, but rather bringing what we can as a woman. So that's sort of been my observation, is that I think it is changing towards that now.
In your experience now, having worked quite specifically with women and other stuff, what are the main components that women seem to need more support with?
I think self-assurance is the main one. So it's really believing that they're good enough to be in the role and good enough to bring what they can to the table. So confidence, in our leadership programs, we've been focusing on confidence, courage, resilience, and presence, because those are the areas that we really believe women need to have some help with. So we've really seen that once women start having more of a self-awareness, growing in self-assurance, that seems to bring a better leadership to the table, and it makes them feel more worthy of the position, and then has a better outcome.
Okay. Jen, when you hear those topics, does that resonate, or does that conflict with what you think from a strategic development of women outside of the systemic structural issues? Where would you see the whole?
So I don't resonate, honestly, I don't. Because what it does is it perpetuates this idea that we have to fix women. Okay, we don't have to fix women. Women should be able to show up as they show up. Okay, What we have to fix are the structures that require you to only succeed if you are a particular way. And it's such a fine line because, you know, there are very different expectations that are leveraged at women, you know, and so it's leadership tends to then become quite gendered. So when men are boisterous and bold and aggressive, then that's fine. But when women do it, then we want to fix them. We want to change them. When men are quiet and they have a less deliberate sense of leadership, you know, they're considered quietly confident. We have to be considered not assertive. So I don't love that positioning, honestly. You know, it's already hard. And we already have an intersectionality which we don't discuss. Women arrive in organizations, they're Black, they are gay, they are trans, they are neurodiverse, and now we have to be wondering how people perceive us and whether we have confidence. The intersectionality is already complex. Okay, let's create in our organizations the ability for the organization to moderate itself, not for women to be fixed in order to be able to operate. There is no homogeneous group of male leaders. Okay, men arrive and they can lead. Okay, notwithstanding Tendai's points about male loneliness. Okay, true, that exists. Okay, but men benefit from feminism like they don't even know. Okay, because when we create caring spaces that allow for people to individuate, to be able to say, this is how I arrive in all my complexity, with whatever structural realities exist that are created by capitalism and by patriarchy, then men are able to be able to operate differently in organizations. But one of the things we hear from women in the organization is, stop sending me on development programs. Okay, I don't need more development. I have a PhD and you're still sending me on development programs. What I need is strategic sponsorship in the organization.
100%.
Okay. I don't need to be told not to behave in a particular way or to dress in a particular way or to not be mouthy. I'm super mouthy in the organization. Okay, but am I being mouthy about the right stuff? You know, am I looking at, and we have to also think about the fact that we operate under capitalism, you know, which at the moment is in an incredibly intense space. Okay, where it appears as though we are only benefiting or only attempting to benefit quarterly numbers. We aren't looking at long-term sustainability of organizations. So we are willing to stretch people beyond reasonable limits to be able to make a quarterly number and not care about the fact that they can't sustain these kind of pressures long term. You know, when Tendai speaks about men in organizations, they're coming under pressure, not because they're men, but because of capitalism. You know, because the numbers are making it impossible for them to have balanced lives. Our fathers worked in particular jobs. They worked 8-hour days. My father was a tradesman. You know, he earned a weekly salary and he was able to build a house, have 2 cars, send his children to a good public school. At the moment, men are working and they can't, and they're working hard and they can't do the basics with the salaries they earn. This is not a leadership problem. This is a systemic problem. Okay. And when we individuate those problems and make it sound as if it's the individual that's not coping, okay, that's when we decide, oh, we need mental health work. Okay. Because we take what is a systemic problem and we pass it on to the individual and then we want to fix the individual. Okay. That is not fair on people. And so I think as women, our responsibility in the organization is to say, no, I'm not well washing. We're not doing that nonsense. Okay, let's deal with some of the systemic problems in organizations. Let's focus on them. Let's fix them, because we are not fixing for ourselves. We're fixing generationally. I bring young women into this organization. They haven't had babies yet. They haven't got husbands yet. But that's part of their trajectory. How are they going to do it all? And we do not want to be superwoman.
Mm.
We shouldn't have to be superwoman. We should be career women who can work an 8-hour day and raise kids. That's what we should be building. Sorry,
And
was that a
likewise.
bit of a rave?
No, not at all. Well, that's that's why you're here. But it's like the same as there should be women working 8-hour days and raising children, as there should be men working 8-hour days and raising the children they made.
Yeah.
100%.
We want to normalize society, and at the moment we are so on the edge of something crazy. Okay. And we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it in boardrooms. We don't talk about it around the dinner table. And that is why more and more young women, and my daughter included, who's just completed an undergrad degree, says, I don't want to get married. I don't want to have children, because they see what they have to face. And we've made it an impossible model, for them to replicate. Nobody should have to do the things we do. It's crazy. It's not sustainable, not for women or men or marriage or children or any of those things. It's not a sustainable model. We have to break the model.
Paul, you were nodding wildly.
Because Genevieve was just spitting fire, and I loved everything that she was saying. And, as she was speaking on that issue of imposter syndrome, it's one of those topics that just gets me fired up, because I'm so tired of answering the question of women and imposter syndrome, because we are not looking at the spaces that women are being made to operate in, where they are constantly having to prove themselves, where they are constantly having to show their value and their worth. We are never addressing that, but we always want to be addressing, maybe you need to work on this. I completely get that. And we do that, we work on that, and then we show up. But as Genevieve said, the structures haven't changed. I think a good example of this is in parental leave policies, right? They'll say, the woman can have a 4-month or a 6-month maternity leave, and then the husband can, take a 2-week or a 1 month or whatever it is. But you're taking choice away from women. You're inadvertently forcing them into the role of primary caregiver without giving their male counterparts that same responsibility, should they choose it. And if you asked me, hands down, I would have wanted to take that 4 months or the 6 months or whatever it is. I wouldn't have wanted, Tendai to do it for my own reasons. But the fact is, the choice is taken away from us. And the way that you balance that is that, no, firstly, it's not maternity leave, it's not paternity leave, it's parental leave. And you give women and you give men a choice to be able to show up to those gender roles in a way that they see fit, that's just one of the ways that I feel structurally we take these choices away from women without even realizing that's what we're doing.
I wanna just add to that, for me, I feel like the issues we're discussing and this system, such as it is, it disproportionately affects women than men, right? So men also feel imposter syndrome, but it's safer for them to feel imposter syndrome. And the system has got guardrails and cushions so that you are not exposed as a man. For a woman who feels imposter syndrome, the system is almost designed to find the gaps in your competency, ability, knowledge. The same the expectations are not equal. The standards are double. So I think sort of almost before we go to the systemic level, we sort of have to look at what is the existing impact space, right? And so even on the issue of parental leave that Mpho has just been discussing, no one would say this, but by creating this disproportionate time away from work for women than for men, you are creating a systemic reality of being invisible to promotion, to good work, to the kind of things that the man, after 2 weeks, he's ready, he's available to be chosen for this, that, and the other thing. The woman has been, again, by no quote unquote fault of her own, had their choice taken away and put on paid leave for this very extended period of time, right? And no one is thinking about what is the impact of that, right? Because the projects are not waiting for her to come back. The projects are going to carry on, and who's available? It's the man. So we are sort of inbuilding and perpetuating. So again, when Genevieve talks about sustainable, systemic, generational, I think we have to have this lens that what are the there's the fruit and then there's the root, right? At this point, the part of the fruit space, part of what these symptoms, the impacts are that women are disproportionately impacted. And so I think, we have to first look at how do we create just parity. So, Nancy Klein talks about a lot of the qualities that we have classified as feminine are fundamentally human. It is human to listen. It is human to share your feelings. But as society, we have made those attributes into feminine attributes, right? And so we have sort of almost dehumanized what it is to be a leader, because now men do not have the license to be vulnerable and empathetic and to feel and express. And women are called, soft and whatever, emotional. We almost create this derogatory and discriminatory sort of barrier, right, between what are fundamentally human. And I think for me, that's part of how systemically we look at and say, men, because it is still largely men who are controlling and pulling the levers of the systems, it is okay for us to be human and not to have this, because I think the moment you talk about women's initiatives and then you talk about, it has become almost a superficial exercise. It's become a bit like sort of greenwashing and whitewashing. It's like we're just doing it just for the sake of doing it. But by the time next year comes and the new KPIs and the new budgets, we've already forgotten that we did this thing, So yeah, I'm really mindful of how the existing systems, such as they are, impact women, and how do we, deal with and create some balance there. And then we take a step back and say, okay, how do we dismantle and future-proof and fix this for our children? I mean, I'm a father to 2 girls, and I show up in the world with an understanding that I want to build a world that is going to see them for who they are and give them an honest shot at just a successful life, whatever that means for them, without being prescriptive about what that is because they are a woman.
I think that the parenting thing is an interesting lens, and something I've thought quite a bit about as a parent of 2 boys and a girl, and all entering sort of the workforce now. I would very much like my daughter to work in a world where there isn't these systemic barriers, where she has equal access to opportunities, etc. And I very much want my boys to be able to earn a living and provide for families and actually get a job. And on the one, and these 2 don't seem to right now both be possible. It's a kind of, you've got to lean in one direction or another, because I would like them to both be true, and maybe in the fullness of time they will be. But it feels for the boys to thrive, they need to be more boyish and lean into the competitiveness and what makes men successful in the workplace. You want them to comply with that to an extent, because that's how they'll get in. But it's not actually nice for the girls entering the workforce, or my daughter, who's not bringing that same stuff. So as a mother, a woman actually with some influence in this space, what do you do? What do you do?
I think we shouldn't give up on this generation quite yet. They have some interesting dynamics, which I think we didn't have just by virtue of when we grew up and how we grew up. But in many ways, I think this generation are not as closely tied to this idea of making shareholder money. Okay. And it's partly, I think, connected to what is a knowledge economy. Okay. Plus, they have grown up with believing that all things are possible. Whereas I think for our generation, just getting a job was already fabulous. Okay, they've grown, they've traveled, they want to see the world, they want to have everything all at once at the same time. And what that does is it fundamentally changes the headspace about work. We have youngsters here who are like, I leave at 5:05, I'm done. Okay, not like us who generationally sat until 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, took our laptops, homework. They want to do other things. Okay, they want to experience things differently. And so the constraints of our generation, having been raised by boomers, you know, where all loyalty, all responsibility, all thanks, all praise was for this organization that you spent 25 or 30 years in, doesn't exist anymore. Plus, they're growing up in a generation where job security isn't what it used to be. You know, so I think that they also need to enter into organizations that aren't fixed because they need to do the fixing. I think as a generation of parents, we also kind of want things to be fabulous for our children and perfect. You know, we had to figure shit out. They'll figure it out. You know, they'll figure it out because they shouldn't have a choice but to figure it out. Because they're not the last generation. They're just a generation. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be awesome. It just needs to be better than what we are doing. So I'm disinclined to make it perfect for them. They need to come in. They've got 40 years of work ahead of them. Best not be completely happy. Figure what you're going to do in 40 years. You know, you'll figure it out. Because what is needed in the future is not what we can provide today. They have to iterate it. You know, we're not going to make it perfect for them. They'll figure it out on the journey. And I think the skills, the abilities, the behaviors, the tech, all of those things are emerging. Nothing we do today can make it okay for 20 years' time. They'll figure it out. Yeah. Sorry, Ange. I think that's where we are as moms. is having a bit of faith that they'll figure it out.
Yes. No, and I think they will. We are still left with today, though.
Yeah. So
we are the ones still in the workplace today facing the same question. And although I'm listening, and I know Osha's listening with big ears going, okay, we get it, that there's a lot in the workplace that structurally makes it difficult for women to take their rightful place. And the statistics are still horrific. You know, there's been women's leadership development taking place for 40 years, 50 years, and there's still, I did 40% of jobs. So women made up 50% of the working age population, but 40% of the jobs, and only 35% of management positions. So it's women's representation in the workplace has increased 2.4% in 10 years. So it's still going to take 100 years to get to gender parity in managerial roles. That's quite a big gap.
That's before
AI. Well, yeah, I mean, there are other problems. I mean, that's just a whole different story of what to do with that. But women still only hold 30% of leadership positions. And so there are some systemic issues. And it's all well and good to wait for the system to change when you're not the person who can change the system. And one of the reasons, well, one of the arguments we need to consider is is it worth bothering to assist humans who are women with self-empowerment skills? Because that's not the organization saying you've got to change. That's going, here's some tools to help you decide how you want to show up.
Mm.
Which is quite different. I mean, I want to like reject the whole you have to behave in a certain way in order to fit in. That's the pretzeling situation. And I think that time has come and gone. I'm curious as to when we're talking about women's leadership development into today and into the future, this is not about conforming to a particular role expectation, but it's around developing mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets that give women choices around how they show up and if they show up, and they've got the bandwidth to show up.
I wonder, before others come in, I want to say 3 words, right? That I think Tendai and Mpho can then maybe pick up on, so I don't dominate the conversation. I think in terms of our generational legacy, okay, there are 3 things we have to do. We have to, while we are in it, change the culture in our organizations. Okay, culture matters. More
How
than
do you change
anything
culture,
else,
Jen?
Culture matters. And I'm going to let Mpho and Tendai have a go at that, because I think we don't disagree on the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
The second is, change the systems where you can. Okay, and these are the systems around decision-making powers in the organization. Change those. We have the ability, we are senior in our organizations now. We can change those, okay? And then the last one is, where possible, and it's always possible, insist on systemic fairness. There are things we can do that just make things easier. And I'll leave the rest of the panel to talk to those or others. But it's true that we have a long-term perspective, but we also today have the ability to make those 3 changes in our business.
100%. And if I can just add to what you've said, Jen, and Angela, you spoke about how does women's leadership development provide us with the tools we need. I think one of the biggest tools is creating that self-awareness as women, and understanding and celebrating the differences that we have to men. Because I think if you cannot firstly recognize that we are different, how we are different, why we are different, how society treats us, how women show up because of the societies that we are forced to survive in. I mean, I recently attended a high network event with other women, and I saw this beautiful woman. She is driving a Range Rover, and she's right up there. She's your C-suite lady. And I remember one of the questions she asked, because it was an estate planning discussion, and she was like, how is a safe way to put away money from my husband? That was essentially the question that she was asking. And I mean, I was mind boggled. And at the end of the day, I'm like, we are women. We're living in a high gender-based violence society. We are fearing for our lives. And we assume that once you get to a certain level, certain issues are beneath you, or you're beyond them. And that was really an eye-opener for me to say, we need to be able to have that self-awareness. We need to be able to see how we are impacted by where we are, and how that in turn affects how we show up in the workplace. And once we have that self-awareness, once we understand the language, once we learn the tools, we are then, to Genevieve's point, able to go out and then challenge the culture to say, hold on, I'm a woman, I'm different. I've got a 28-day hormonal cycle. I am at my caregiving stage. I'm at a premenopausal stage. I'm at we go through so much, and just understanding that about ourselves helps us to show up so much better in those spaces, to be able to push back. I mean, I know I make it a point to get into a boardroom, sit down, talk about my 2 children and my husband, and how I want to cook dinner at 6 o'clock, whereas that used to be taboo. And I never used to know that it was all right to get into a space and be that. I used to try be homogenous and fit in and stoic and be like a man. And I push back a lot more on those things now. And we have to be the ones that drive the culture. And of course, we do need male sponsors as well to make it okay for us to be, feminine, to be ourselves, to be authentic. And yeah, I think a lot of it starts with understanding that we are different and celebrating that difference, and then showing up to be able to push back on some of those barriers to entry.
I like that. That's a nice sort of evolution of how women can show up and set the tone differently. And it's not purely a women's thing. It might just also be a generational changes that makes it more acceptable. I think COVID probably also helped, as people said, spent a lot of time on camera with their children on their lap. That probably brought your full self into the workplace more than in 2019, perhaps. Yeah. Osha, your thinking and sort of musings as we've wandered through our conversation?
I'd just like to pick on the one thread from Impul. It's around women learning how to network better. Because I think that we've realized that in the past men were quite good at it, staying at the pub and going to golf. And now I'm noticing that women are creating opportunities to network with one another. And I think that support helps a lot to get us to the point, Genevieve, when the systems will be fixed and the systemic issues will go away. In the meantime, let's network, let's find strength from one another. And it doesn't have to be women's only groups, but we need to learn to do that networking better in order to feel supported in this world.
100%.
Yeah, I think some of the things that I've noticed working, especially with younger people and younger women particularly, but it's men as well, is there's just a denial that the workplace is built on relationships, and building them is part of being effective in a human workplace. So networking and appearing at a meeting 5 minutes before to say hello, remembering that Paul's got 2 daughters. These are actually important skills in the workplace, and it's the human to human. I think actually women are quite well geared to that. They just need the permission or be told it's needed, not just working hard. And women tend to be very good at that.
Though, Ange, it's the unintended consequences of tech. You know, if I can WhatsApp someone, I don't need to call them. I don't need to walk across the room and introduce myself. So a shyness has evolved, which I think is not particularly female. You know, sometimes we take on burdens that are not ours. You know, my sons say, "Mom, please can you call the dentist for me?" I'm like, "You have to be bloody kidding. There's not a chance in hell I'm phoning the dentist." You know, you phone them, and it's almost
just remember he isn't like 20, so
and they identify this as a trauma. I'm like, well, then you're going to be traumatized a lot, honey, because you're going to have to figure it out. You know, so I think that just some unintended consequences have occurred, because of tech, and they'll soon realize that this idea that you can swipe left, is not the same. When I can have any human in the world as a partner, chances are I'm going to have no one, because if you don't go out and you're sitting in your kitchen, it ain't going to happen for you. So they have to figure it out.
Yeah, they have to. Tendai, your closing thoughts?
When I think about the culture shift, right? You talk about the boomers having been the ones, I think, in our lifetime, been leading organizations, nations, and what that has meant for how the society has been shaped, right? And then I think about what Mpho is saying, that she'll go into a room and say, "Hey, listen, guys, I need to be home by 6 because my husband needs me and my children need me." And it's safe to do so. Even now, there might be some people that are even a little bit uncomfortable by that level of, hang on, you're shaking things up a little bit too much. But actually, that's sort of what's required. So I think when we talk about confidence, when we talk about the tools, as you call them, Angela, to show up and have the choice to show up a certain way, I've been so impressed and so motivated myself by what I've seen a lot happening online. So digital tools, again, have also provided a unique equalizer, because where the system wants to render women invisible, women are like, okay, I'm going to go on a personal branding drive and I'm going to tell people who I am, right? Unapologetically so. And so this whole idea of personal branding has, I think, largely been driven by women having to say, okay, if the organization and the systems are not going to provide a spotlight and a platform for me to be visible, I'm going to do it myself. And it's largely sort of created, I mean, what we call this influencer culture, right? But actually, a lot of that has come from, I think, a need to brand personally and to create a different narrative around what is a professional woman? What does she look like, right? She looks like Mpho, who's been on this meteoric career trajectory, but also loves to go and have some wine in the winelands, and also loves to do puzzles with her children, and also likes to take a hike, and also likes to sleep on the weekend, right? This is what a woman actually looks like, who's powerful. It's not one thing. We have made it okay for men to not be one thing, and we find ways to make it safe for them, right? And I think just socially, we have to be more creative, I think, around the realization that for the longest time, C-suite decisions have taken place on golf courses and at drinks, and it's just the reality. So now again, women are, I think, starting to take ownership of the fact that, okay, well, we can also do our own things and find our own spaces to connect and sometimes to infiltrate, some of these quote unquote closed systems, and I think show up in that way. So I think, and then I think for me, the last thing is this idea of being always on. I think that's one of the big cultural realities that we have to intentionally fight. I know some organizations actually turn off email servers after 5 o'clock, okay, in order to encourage people of all genders, by the way, to not be on their phones and whatever with their, when, and not be reachable. There's been times when I've seen calls coming in after certain times. There are work calls, and then, Mpho's working late, and then now this and this. And it's like that culture is of always being on, I think is something that if I were to start somewhere in terms of culture change, it would be, guys, let's switch off when we need to switch off. Again, I think it disproportionately impacts women for the very reasons that they are caregivers oftentimes, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is a hope in terms of the national generational evolution of things. But I also think just that conversations like this that demonstrate an awareness of these and ask these tough questions and bring these, I think, challenging perspectives, for me, definitely gives me hope that we are moving in the right direction.
Excellent. What strikes me as being a thought is that just as YouTube democratized movie making, technology is going to democratize, or does already democratize, networking and visibility and brand building, which traditionally was closed to, unless you were part of the in-group that was invited to the golf day. And perhaps some of this, as we look at women and facilitating progress in the organization, is not, it's never been about competency, but it's always been about navigating the complexity that has somewhat been closed to you. And now the shift might be more around leveraging the tools that you have access to more intentionally to be visible and to gain the awareness of and be sponsored by and network through instead of the person to person, but using the tech instead of being frightened by it or seeing it as something else I have to do on my day. So it's a very interesting conversation, ladies and gentle humans. I appreciate your time and your thinking and your commentary very much, and getting onto OBS and recording all this situationally. I hope you found that useful and fun and kind of different for your day job. Yeah?
Very fun. I wish we had more time.
That's why they
Absolutely.
created wine, Mpho.
Yes, that's it's totally the kind of conversation you want to have with wine. It really is. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
so great. Thank you guys so much for sharing yourselves and your stories and your thinking.